Hello and welcome to Story Verdict. Today I am going to tell you the story of the mute assistant and the voice that burned the boardroom. The story goes like this. The first time I spoke inside Meridian Axis, 43 people stopped breathing at once. Ethan Cole was standing at the head of the boardroom table with my project displayed across 3 enormous screens behind him, one hand resting beside a contract worth $800 million, and the other wrapped possessively around the waist of Vivian Ross, the woman he had agreed to marry in exchange for her father's investment. 5 minutes earlier, he had introduced me to the directors as the mute intern who helped organize the presentation, although every calculation, design, risk model, and strategic framework glowing behind him had come from the notebooks I kept locked in the bottom drawer of my desk. When one of the board members asked why my initials appeared inside the earliest prototype files, Ethan laughed, looked directly at me, and said, "Sophie is a sweet girl, but she has no future in strategy. She cannot even speak for herself. I gave her this position because I felt sorry for her." The room responded with the uncomfortable silence reserved for cruelty committed by someone too powerful to challenge. I stood beside the wall carrying a tablet and a tray of coffee, exactly where Ethan had instructed me to remain. I had spent 11 months answering him through written notes, text messages, and gestures. I had listened while executives mocked me in elevators, watched assistants place unfinished work on my desk because they assumed a silent woman could not refuse, and endured Ethan accepting praise for ideas he had once asked me to explain with diagrams because he could not understand them on his own. Until that morning, no one inside Meridian Axis had heard my voice. Most believed a psychological trauma had taken it from me permanently. Ethan believed my silence had made me harmless. He signed the final page of the contract, handed the pen to Vivian's father, and announced that Project Lumen would secure his appointment as Chief Executive Officer before the end of the quarter. Then he turned to me and ordered me to bring more coffee. I placed the tray on the table. "There will be no need," I said. My voice was calm, low, and clear. The sound moved through the boardroom like heat through dry paper. Ethan's fingers froze around the pen. Vivian stepped away from him. The directors stared at me as if the furniture had begun speaking. I walked toward the screens, removed the small black employee badge clipped to my jacket, and placed it on top of the contract. "My name is not Sophie Reed," I continued. "It is Sophia Arden, and as of 7 o'clock this morning, Arden Global controls 60% of Meridian Axis." The color disappeared from Ethan's face. At the far end of the room, the doors opened, and my father's chief executive, Nathaniel Crane, entered with 6 attorneys, 3 independent directors, and the chairman of the regulatory committee. Nathaniel, a man Ethan had spent years trying to meet, stopped beside me and bowed his head. "Welcome back, Chairwoman," he said. The contract beneath Ethan's hand was immediately suspended. His promotion disappeared before the ink had dried. Within the next hour, the company car, executive apartment, stock options, expense accounts, and severance package he believed belonged to him were reclaimed. By noon, security escorted him out of the building carrying nothing but his personal wallet, the clothes he wore, and a cardboard box containing objects he could prove he had purchased with his own money. That was the moment the financial press later called the voice that burned the boardroom. But my story did not begin with a corporate takeover or a stolen project. It began with the first time I learned that silence could reveal more about people than any question ever would. I was born Sophia Elise Arden, the only child of Daniel Arden, founder of Arden Global Holdings, and Elise Marlowe Arden, a behavioral economist who believed power was most dangerous when its owner stopped noticing it. Our family name appeared on hospitals, research centers, shipping terminals, energy grids, and scholarship buildings. By the time I was 10, newspapers had already published estimates of the fortune I might inherit. Strangers discussed my future before I understood the meaning of inheritance. Some predicted I would become a spoiled socialite. Others called me the princess of private equity. At school, children who had never spoken to me invited me to parties after discovering my surname, and parents introduced their sons to me with smiles so deliberate that even at 12 I could feel the calculation beneath them. My mother hated the way wealth distorted every room we entered. She came from a family of public school teachers and met my father before Arden Global became an empire. She understood money, but she did not worship it. She taught me to watch how people treated drivers, receptionists, cleaners, waiters, and anyone whose job required them to absorb another person's impatience. Most people perform kindness upward, she told me. Character is what remains when they believe no reward is watching. My father built companies. My mother studied people. Between them, I grew up believing leadership required both numbers and attention. My childhood was privileged, but it was not careless. I attended private schools, traveled on company aircraft, and lived inside a house large enough to contain rooms we rarely entered. Yet my mother made me work every summer in positions where the Arden name was hidden. At 14, I stocked shelves in a warehouse owned by one of our subsidiaries. At 16, I answered customer complaints for an energy provider. At 18, I spent 6 weeks cleaning laboratories after the evening research teams went home. Those experiences did not make me understand poverty, and my mother never allowed me to pretend they did. I could leave each job knowing comfort waited for me. What they gave me was a view of our companies from below the executive floors. I heard employees describe policies my father believed were generous, but which managers had twisted into tools of punishment. I saw supervisors speak differently when they thought headquarters was calling. I learned that information usually became more flattering as it traveled upward. My mother called this the altitude problem. Power changes the air around you, she said. Everyone starts breathing carefully. The trauma that taught me to stop speaking happened when I was 19. My mother had discovered a bribery network inside one of Arden Global's foreign infrastructure divisions. Senior executives were paying government officials, inflating contracts, and using unsafe materials in public transit projects. She gathered evidence quietly and planned to present it at an emergency board meeting. One of the executives involved learned what she intended to do. The night before the meeting, our car was forced off a mountain road while my mother and I were returning from a research conference. The driver died instantly. My mother remained conscious long enough to pull me from the wreckage before the fuel ignited. I remember lying in the rain beside twisted metal, hearing her struggle to breathe and trying to tell her help was coming. She placed one burned hand against my face and said, "Do not let fear choose the shape of your life." Then she died before the ambulance arrived. My body recovered within months. My voice did not. Doctors called it trauma-induced selective mutism. There was nothing physically wrong with my throat, but every attempt to speak returned me to the roadside, the rain, and my mother's final breath. For 11 months, I communicated through writing. People who had once interrupted me became uncomfortable around my silence. Some spoke to me as if my intelligence had disappeared with my voice. Others revealed things they would never have said if they believed I might answer. Relatives discussed my inheritance beside me. Executives speculated that grief had me unfit to lead. A family friend tried to persuade my father to place my shares under permanent trusteeship while patting my hand and telling me not to worry about complicated matters. Silence stripped away the social performances that speech had encouraged. I hated my condition, but I could not deny what it showed me. My voice returned during a therapy session nearly a year after the crash. My therapist asked me to describe the rain. I whispered one word, cold, then another, endless. Within weeks, I could speak normally again. My father wanted to announce my recovery publicly. I asked him not to. I was not ashamed of the mutism, but I had begun to understand the strange clarity of being underestimated. Outside my family and medical team, only a small circle knew my voice had returned. In public, I continued communicating mostly through writing while completing my education. I studied systems engineering, behavioral economics, and corporate law. I joined Arden Global under another identity in rotating operational positions, sometimes speaking and sometimes not, depending on what the role required. My father disliked the secrecy. "A leader cannot spend her life hiding behind experiments," he said. "I am not hiding," I answered. "I am learning what people do when they think leadership is absent." He worried I had turned trauma into a method of control. He was not entirely wrong. Silence gave me information, and information can become addictive. Yet I did not intend to deceive people for entertainment. I wanted to understand whether sincerity could survive proximity to power. I had spent my entire life wondering whether anyone outside my family could see me without seeing Arden Global first. Every friendship carried a question. Every romantic interest arrived with an unspoken calculation. Did he like my mind? Or the aircraft? Did she value my company or the invitations? Would kindness remain if the inheritance vanished? My mother had believed character revealed itself in the treatment of those who seemed unable to provide rewards. After her death, that belief became almost sacred to me. Meridian Axis entered my life because my father wanted to acquire it. The company had once been a respected engineering and technology firm known for logistics systems used in emergency response, medical distribution, and urban infrastructure. After its founder retired, Meridian began declining under a divided board, reckless borrowing, and executives more interested in quarterly appearances than durable innovation. Arden Global held 12% of its debt through several investment vehicles and considered either restructuring the company or allowing it to fail. My father asked me to review the acquisition proposal. The financial case was strong, but I objected to buying a company without understanding the people inside it. Meridian employed nearly 9,000 workers. A hostile takeover could save the assets while destroying the culture. I proposed entering the company as a junior employee before making a recommendation. My father called the plan unnecessary and dangerous. Nathaniel Crane called it reckless but useful. In the end, they agreed under strict conditions. Arden Security would monitor me discreetly. My identity would remain sealed. I would use my mother's maiden name, Reed, and apply through Meridian's standard internship program. My background would show a modest education history, temporary administrative work, and a documented preference for nonverbal communication due to past trauma. I never claimed that speaking was physically impossible. Human Resources received a legitimate accommodation request stating that I communicated through text and writing when anxiety made speech difficult. Everyone else formed their own assumptions. I was 28 when I entered Meridian Axis wearing a gray suit purchased from an ordinary department store, carrying a second-hand handbag, and holding a notebook that cost less than the coffee served on the executive floor. The receptionist glanced at my file, saw the accommodation notice, and immediately slowed her speech as though silence meant poor comprehension. My first supervisor assigned me to copy documents, organize storage rooms, and deliver lunches. I completed every task without complaint, while observing how decisions moved through the company. The lower floors were full of talented employees working around broken systems. Engineers reused equipment because executives delayed purchases while approving luxury retreats. Analysts produced accurate warnings that disappeared before reaching the board. Project managers spent more time protecting themselves from blame than solving problems. The company was not failing because it lacked intelligence. It was failing because truth became dangerous before reaching authority. Ethan Cole was Director of Strategic Innovation. I first saw him in an elevator during my second week. He entered while speaking angrily into his phone about a delayed prototype. 3 assistants followed carrying folders and samples. When the elevator stopped suddenly between floors, one assistant dropped a case containing delicate sensor components. Ethan ended the call, knelt, and helped gather the pieces. He did not shout. He asked whether anyone was hurt and told the frightened assistant that equipment could be replaced. Then he noticed me holding the elevator wall with one hand because enclosed spaces still triggered memories of the wreck. He asked if I was all right. I nodded. He read the accommodation symbol on my badge and pointed toward his phone, asking silently whether I wanted him to contact someone. I shook my head. When the elevator resumed, he remained beside me until the doors opened. It was a small kindness, performed when he believed I was an insignificant intern who could offer him nothing. I remembered it. Over the following month, I saw other versions of Ethan. He was ambitious, impatient, and intensely aware of status, but he also knew the names of junior engineers and occasionally defended staff during executive reviews. He came from a working-class family and had built his career without the elite connections surrounding many Meridian directors. Employees admired him because he understood the technical work better than most executives. He was 36, confident in public, restless in private, and close enough to the chief executive position to believe one exceptional project could secure it. I began working for him after correcting an error in a market analysis he planned to present to the board. His assistant had left the report on a shared printer. I noticed that the projected demand model double-counted 2 regional contracts and would overstate revenue by 18%. I wrote a note explaining the mistake and attached supporting calculations. Ethan found me later that afternoon. "Did you write this?" he asked. I nodded. He studied me, then the equations. "Who taught you forecasting?" I wrote that I studied applied economics. He checked my personnel file and discovered my listed qualifications were modest but legitimate. "This is better than work produced by analysts earning 5 times your salary," he said. "Would you like a temporary assignment in strategy?" I nodded again. That was how I became the mute assistant outside Ethan Cole's office. He gave me real work from the beginning. I reviewed proposals, built research summaries, and attended meetings to take notes. Because I did not speak, executives often forgot I was present. They disclosed rivalries, private doubts, and information they hid from Ethan. I never used personal gossip, but I warned him when decisions were based on false assumptions. He began relying on my written assessments. At first, he credited me. During one meeting, a director praised a cost model, and Ethan said, "Sophie found the flaw in our original numbers." The recognition mattered because it appeared sincere. He brought me coffee without asking whether silence made me incapable of choosing. He learned basic signs so he could communicate when meetings moved too quickly for writing. He never touched me unexpectedly. When another manager referred to me as the broken intern, Ethan removed him from the project. "She hears everything," he said. "And she understands more than most of you." I started trusting him. That trust became affection slowly. I admired the hunger beneath his confidence because it reminded me of my father before wealth changed the scale of his world. Ethan wanted to build something meaningful. He spoke about growing up in an apartment where power outages were common and his mother stored medicine inside a cooler when the refrigerator failed. He believed technology should make essential systems resilient for people who could not purchase private alternatives. That vision led to Project Lumen. Meridian had spent years developing logistics software for emergency supply distribution, but the systems remained fragmented. Hospitals, shelters, transport fleets, and energy networks use separate platforms that failed to communicate during disasters. I designed a framework capable of predicting disruptions, rerouting medical supplies, and protecting local distribution even when central networks collapsed. The core idea came from the night my mother died. The emergency response on the mountain had been delayed because regional communications systems failed during the storm. I had spent years studying how decentralized networks could prevent similar losses. At Meridian, I finally saw enough operational data to build the model at full scale. I worked on it after hours, initially as an independent research proposal. Ethan discovered me in a conference room at 2 a.m. surrounded by diagrams. He asked what I was designing. I hesitated, then showed him. He remained silent for nearly 10 minutes while reading. "This could save the company," he said. I wrote, "It could save lives." He smiled, "That too." We began developing Lumen together, though the intellectual foundation was mine. Ethan understood Meridian's existing systems and helped identify engineers who could build prototypes. I created the architecture, financial models, deployment strategy, and regulatory framework. We met before sunrise, worked through weekends, and communicated through a combination of notes, diagrams, and the signs he continued learning. There was intimacy in the process. He began recognizing my moods from the way I held a pen. I could tell when he was frightened by the speed of his speech. He trusted me with stories he told no one else. His father had left when he was 9. His mother worked 2 jobs and died before his first promotion. Ethan believed achievement was the only protection against becoming invisible. "People respect results," he told me one night. I wrote, "Some people respect power. It is not the same." He asked what I believed people should respect. I wrote, "Character when no one useful is watching." He looked at me for a long time. "You are watching," he said. The line stayed with me because it sounded like recognition. I wondered whether I had finally found the sincerity my mother taught me to seek. Ethan did not know my family, wealth, or real education. He knew only the woman who ate lunch at her desk, wore the same 3 suits, communicated through a notebook, and took public transportation home. Yet he asked my opinion before every major decision. He defended my work. He once left an awards dinner early because a senior executive mocked my silence after drinking too much. On my birthday, which he found in the employee system, he gave me a fountain pen engraved with a small line, "Your ideas deserve permanence." I began falling in love with him. The feeling frightened me because my entire experiment was built around observing people without revealing myself. Love transformed observation into participation. I wanted to tell him the truth. Several times, I prepared the words. My voice worked normally in private. I practiced saying, "My name is Sophia Arden," while looking into the mirror of my apartment. Each time, I imagined his expression changing as he understood the scale of what I had hidden. Would every kindness before the revelation remain trustworthy? Or would the Arden name rewrite his feelings in both our minds? I delayed, telling myself I would speak after Lumen was approved. Ethan complicated the decision by admitting he had feelings for me. It happened during a winter storm when the office emptied early. We remained behind testing simulation. The power flickered, and the emergency lights turned the conference room blue. Ethan sat beside me and said, "Sometimes I forget you do not speak because I hear you more clearly than anyone else." I looked down at the notebook. He touched the edge of the page, not my hand. "I know there are things you do not tell me. I know your silence is not emptiness. I do not need explanations before you are ready." He signed clumsily. "You matter to me." I signed back. "You matter to me, too." He leaned closer but stopped before kissing me. "Tell me no," he whispered, then smiled sadly at the impossible phrasing and corrected himself by signing the question. I should have stopped him. Instead, I nodded. The kiss was gentle, uncertain, and devastating because it gave me a future I had not allowed myself to imagine. For 3 months, our relationship remained private. Ethan said Meridian's policies made director-intern relationship dangerous, and I agreed. He arranged for me to report formally to another department while continuing on Lumen as a research contributor. In private, he was warm and attentive. He cooked badly, listened when I communicated slowly, and never pressured me to speak. I visited his modest apartment and saw photographs of his mother beside every major career certificate. He told me he wanted to become chief executive not for money but because Meridian had forgotten why it existed. I believed him. I began planning to end the experiment. I asked Nathaniel to prepare a disclosure strategy. My father was deeply skeptical of Ethan. "He is ambitious," he said. "So am I. You already possess power. He is still hungry enough to confuse possession with survival. He has treated me with kindness when he thinks I have nothing." My father looked at me with the tired caution of a parent who had watched one collision change his family forever. People can be kind and still fail when temptation reaches the correct price. I accused him of distrusting anyone outside our world. He answered, "I distrust the part of every person, including myself, that can justify betrayal when reward becomes large enough." His words angered me because they threatened the conclusion I wanted. I continued preparing the Lumen presentation. The project attracted attention after a successful internal simulation rerouted emergency medical supplies during a fictional earthquake scenario 40% faster than Meridian's existing system. The board scheduled a confidential review. At the same time, Harrow Strategic Systems, controlled by billionaire industrialist Conrad Ross, offered Meridian a massive partnership. Harrow would fund deployment if Meridian granted exclusive manufacturing and data rights. Conrad's daughter, Vivienne, managed the negotiation. She was polished, intelligent, and openly interested in Ethan. I saw the way she touched his arm during meetings and praised his leadership while barely acknowledging the engineers. Ethan told me the attention meant nothing. He said Harrow's investment could secure Lumen and his position. I warned him in writing that their proposed exclusivity would compromise the system's humanitarian purpose and allow Harrow to prioritize profitable regions. He agreed, at least in private. "We will use their money without surrendering control," he said. "Once I am CEO, I can protect the project." I wrote, "Power promise later is often used to excuse compromise now." He kissed my forehead and said I worried too much. The first crack appeared when Ethan removed my name from a preliminary briefing. I discovered it while reviewing slides prepared for Conrad Ross. The title page listed Ethan as chief architect and the engineering team as technical contributors. My name did not appear. I asked him why. He said the board would not trust a strategic project associated with a silent intern. It is temporary, he explained. Once they approve the concept, I will formalize your role. I wrote that authorship was not a ceremonial reward to be added after approval. He became frustrated. You do not understand how boards work. I almost laughed at the irony. I had chaired board committees before he reached middle management. Instead, I wrote, then explain. He said executives needed a credible leader attached to a project of this scale. I asked whether my work lacked credibility or only my status. He rubbed both hands over his face. Sophie, I am trying to get this through the door. You created extraordinary material, but creation and leadership are different. The words hurt because they echoed an executive who had tried to remove my inheritance while I could not speak. I reminded him that our internal files documented my authorship. He said no one was denying my contribution. I am asking you to trust me. I did, though less completely. The second crack came when he began canceling our private evenings to meet Vivienne. He described them as negotiations. Photographs appeared online showing them leaving restaurants together. Meridian's public relations office called them the future of the company's strategic alliance. Ethan insisted the narrative was useful. I asked whether the relationship was only professional. He answered yes, but he no longer looked directly at me. I started investigating quietly, not as an heiress with access to intelligence teams, but as a woman trying to understand whether the person she loved was lying. The truth arrived through a calendar invitation accidentally forwarded to my account. It concerned an engagement announcement at the contract signing ceremony. The note listed Ethan Cole and Vivienne Ross as the central participants. I read it 3 times. Then I searched the executive document system and found a draft statement announcing that their marriage would unite Meridian's innovation leadership with Harrow's industrial network. The statement had been prepared 2 weeks earlier. During those same 2 weeks, Ethan had kissed me, slept beside me, and signed "I love you" against my palm because he believed those words did not require a voice. I confronted him in his office after everyone left. I placed the engagement draft on his desk. He looked at it and became very still. "I was going to tell you," he said. I wrote, when, after the contract, I wrote, "Is it true?" He walked to the window. "It is complicated." I waited. Conrad will not approve the partnership unless he trusts Meridian's leadership. Vivienne and I have known each other professionally for years. The engagement stabilizes the deal. I wrote, "Marriage is a contract. Do not make it sound uglier than it is." I held up my hand and signed, "What am I?" His face tightened. "You know what you are to me." I signed the questions again. He said nothing. I wrote, "Will you marry her?" "Yes." I felt the answer physically, a pressure beneath my ribs. He reproached me. "Sophie, listen to me. Lumen changes everything. If the partnership succeeds, I become CEO. I can create a position for you, protect you, make sure you never have to struggle again." I stared at him. He believed he was offering generosity. I wrote, "You think I need you to give my own work back to me. That is not what I said. You removed my name. Because no one will finance a project led by a mute assistant." The cruelty emerged without preparation. He immediately looked ashamed, but the sentence had already entered the room. I waited for an apology. Instead, he continued, "I am being realistic. You are brilliant, but the world does not reward brilliance it cannot present. I can be the voice Lumen needs." I placed the engraved fountain pen on his desk. Then I wrote with an ordinary pencil, "You never wanted to understand my silence. You wanted to own what could not contradict you." He grabbed my wrist as I turned to leave. "Do not do this. We can still work together." I looked at his hand until he released me. That night, I returned to the secure apartment Arden maintained for me and spoke aloud for the first time in nearly a year. "Activate a full forensic review of Meridian Axis," I told Nathaniel. He heard the change in my voice and did not ask what happened. "Scope," he said. "Intellectual property, executive conduct, Harrow negotiations, debt exposure, and share availability. Your father authorized preparations 3 months ago." I closed my eyes. He knew? He suspected Meridian's board would accept predatory financing. He did not know about Ethan. "Do not tell him yet." Nathaniel paused. Sophia, are you asking for an acquisition because he betrayed you? No. I am asking for the acquisition because Meridian is about to sign away emergency infrastructure technology through a contract built on stolen authorship and concealed conflicts. The betrayal is evidence of the governance failure. And if the acquisition allows you to punish him, then my personal motive must be separated from the legal decision. Build the case so it survives without my feelings. Nathaniel said quietly, Your mother would have said the same. Over the next 10 days, I lived 2 lives more sharply than ever. At Meridian, I remained Sophie Reed, the silent assistant Ethan had wounded but believed he could still control. He avoided discussing our relationship and focused on the signing ceremony. My access to Lumen files was restricted. A new document named him sole originator. Vivian began using the office beside his and treated me like household staff. She handed me coffee orders, asked me to collect dry cleaning, and once placed a list of seating changes on my desk with the note, Since you are not useful in negotiations. I completed only tasks within my employment role and documented everything else. Ethan watched but did not intervene. Perhaps he believed humiliating me would demonstrate loyalty to his future wife. Perhaps he had always been kind only when kindness cost him nothing. Yet there were moments when I saw guilt. He paused outside my desk as though wanting to speak. He kept the engraved pen in his jacket pocket. Once, after Vivian mocked the way I used sign language, he told her to stop. She laughed and asked whether he still felt responsible for his little rescue project. Ethan said, Sophie understands the company better than most directors. Vivian answered, Then it is fortunate she cannot tell anyone what she knows. He did not defend me again. Arden's audit moved quickly. Meridian was more vulnerable than expected. Harrow had quietly purchased options from several shareholders, intending to gain effective control after the Lumen agreement. Meridian's chief financial officer had concealed covenant breaches. The board believed the contract would rescue the company, but its exclusivity clauses would transfer most valuable assets to Harrow if revenue targets were missed. Ethan's promise of marriage was not merely personal ambition. It formed part of Conrad Ross's control strategy. In exchange, Ethan would receive a ceremonial CEO title over a company stripped of its technology. My father called when Nathaniel briefed him. Come home, he said. I am not finished. You have seen enough. I have seen what Ethan became. I have not seen what Meridian's board will choose when presented with the final lie. You do not need to endure public cruelty to complete a report. This is not about the report. Then it is about him. I looked at the city from the apartment window. Partly, my father remained silent. I loved him, I said. The words sounded smaller than the pain, I know. He loved a version of me he believed he could control. Perhaps he loved you and still chose himself when fear and reward became large enough. Does that matter? It may matter to grief. It should not matter to governance. He asked whether I intended to reveal my identity during the signing. I said yes. Then remember, he told me, the purpose is not to prove that a silent woman secretly possessed power. She deserved respect before anyone knew who she was. That sentence became the center of my plan. Arden Global did not buy Meridian to rescue my pride. We acquired distressed debt from 3 banks, purchased shares from directors preparing to exit, and negotiated a conversion with pension funds frightened by the Harrow agreement. At 6:48 on the morning of the signing ceremony, the final transaction cleared. Arden controlled 60% of Meridian's voting equity. Regulatory notices were filed under sealed emergency procedures because evidence suggested directors might transfer protected infrastructure assets before markets opened. Nathaniel sent me a secure message containing one image, a phoenix-shaped authorization mark used by my mother in early Arden contracts. Beneath it, he wrote, "The voice remains yours." I dressed in the same plain gray suit I wore during my first week as an intern. I wanted the board to confront the fact that nothing visible about me had changed. My authority had existed while they handed me empty cups. My intelligence had existed while they spoke slowly. My dignity had existed while Ethan described employment as charity. The only new element would be their knowledge. The signing ceremony occupied Meridian's highest boardroom, a glass chamber overlooking the river. 43 people attended. Directors, Harrow executives, lawyers, regulators, senior engineers, and media representatives approved for the announcement. Ethan wore a dark suit and the silver cufflinks I had given him before our relationship became secret. Vivian wore white, intentionally bridal without being a wedding dress. A diamond ring rested on her finger. Conrad Ross sat beside Meridian's chairman with the calm confidence of a man who believed he already owned the room. I entered carrying the presentation tablet and coffee because Ethan had assigned me both tasks. A junior assistant whispered that I should not have been required to serve, but I signed that I was fine. I wanted every detail recorded exactly as they chose it. Ethan began by describing Meridian's history and the crisis Lumen would solve. The slides used my language almost word for word. He repeated the story I had told him about emergency systems failing during storms, but he removed my mother and made the inspiration about his childhood neighborhood. I watched him transform my grief into branding. He presented the decentralized architecture, predictive routing model, and humanitarian deployment framework. Board members praised the elegance. Conrad called Ethan a visionary. Vivian squeezed his arm. When a technical director named Dr. Leena Patel asked who created the first architecture maps, Ethan answered, "My office developed them." She enlarged the metadata and pointed to the initials SEA, buried inside an early version. Those were my real initials, Sophia Elise Arden. I had included them automatically when the file was created on my private encrypted system. Ethan glanced toward me. "The intern assisted with formatting," he said. Leena looked unconvinced. "Formatting does not generate original simulation branches." Ethan smiled. "Sophie is a sweet girl, but her role has been administrative. She has emotional difficulties and sometimes becomes attached to work she observes." I felt several faces turn toward me. Vivian added, "My fiancé has been excessively generous with her. She would not have this position without his compassion." Conrad laughed. "Then let us hope Meridian's next chief executive stops collecting strays." Ethan did not laugh, but he did not object. The chairman asked whether I wanted to submit a written clarification. Ethan answered before I could. "There is no need to delay an $800 million agreement because an intern wants attention." Then he looked at me with the public confidence of a man who believed private betrayal had already defeated me. "Sophie has no future in strategy. She cannot even speak for herself. I gave her this position because I felt sorry for her. I understood then why my father feared the experiment. Silence can reveal character, but waiting indefinitely for revelation becomes participation in your own erasure." I walked toward the table and set down the coffee tray. Ethan frowned. "We are finished with refreshments. There will be no need," I said. My voice came out exactly as it had during every private preparation, calm, controlled, and entirely mine. Vivian dropped her pen. Meridian's chairman leaned forward. Ethan's lips parted, but no sounds emerged. I almost felt compassion for the shock on his face. He had built his final betrayal on the certainty that I could not answer. "You can speak," he whispered. "Yes, since when?" "Long before you met me." The boardroom began filling with questions. I raised one hand. Years of chairing private Arden sessions returned to my posture without effort. The noise faded. For legal clarity, I have never represented myself as physically incapable of speech. Human Resources received accurate documentation of trauma-related nonverbal accommodation. The assumptions made beyond that file belong to the people who made them. Conrad stood. "Who are you?" I removed the Sophie Reed badge and placed it over Ethan's signature line. "My name is Sophia Elise Arden." The chairman's face changed first. He had met me once when I was a teenager, though grief and a decade of privacy had altered my appearance. Conrad looked toward his attorney. Vivian stared at Ethan as though he had personally arranged the trap. "That is absurd," Ethan said. "Sophia Arden is Daniel Arden's daughter." "Correct. She does not work as an intern. She did for 11 months. The boardroom doors opened. Nathaniel Crane entered with Arden's legal team, independent directors, representatives from the debt consortium, and 2 regulators. Ethan recognized Nathaniel immediately. A framed magazine cover featuring him hung in Ethan's apartment. Nathaniel approached me, bowed his head, and said, "Welcome back, Chairwoman." The words moved through the room more violently than my first sentence. Meridian's chairman stood so quickly his chair rolled backward. Conrad demanded to know why Arden's chief executive was present. Nathaniel placed a transaction certificate on the table. Because at 7 o'clock this morning, Arden Global completed the acquisition and conversion of holdings representing 60% of Meridian Axis voting equity. Lawyers reached for documents. Phones began vibrating. The central screens changed from the Lumen presentation to the official ownership structure. Arden Global appeared at the top with 60%. Harrow's options were suspended pending fraud review. The agreement Ethan intended to sign could not proceed without my approval. I faced him. You were correct about one thing. Lumen needed a voice. He stepped toward me. Sophia. Whatever this is, we can discuss it privately. You removed my name privately. You humiliated me publicly. The evidence will be addressed where the contract was intended to become public. I asked Nathaniel to display the authorship record. The first screen showed time-stamped files created on my encrypted workstation 6 months before Ethan became involved. The second showed handwritten notebooks scanned by Arden's Intellectual Property Council before I entered Meridian. The third contained recordings from our development sessions. Because I communicated through writing and digital diagrams, nearly every exchange produced a record. Ethan's requests appeared beside my explanations. One message read, "I still do not understand the regional redundancy layer. Can you rebuild the model?" My response included the architecture later presented as his breakthrough. Another recording showed him saying, "This is your system, Sophie. I am only helping it survive, Meridian." The room remained silent while his own voice identified me as the creator. Ethan looked toward the company attorney. Those conversations were part of my office. "Work created by an intern belongs to Meridian," I said. "Lumen's foundational intellectual property predates my employment. Meridian received limited development access under a research reservation filed with Human Resources on my first day. The document was ignored by your office but legally preserved." Nathaniel displayed the signed reservation. Meridian could negotiate a license. It did not own the architecture. Ethan's face hardened. "Then you entered this company planning to trap us." "I entered to determine whether Meridian was worth saving." Conrad interrupted. "This is industrial espionage." A regulator answered before I did. No proprietary Harrow information was accessed through Ms. Arden's position. Arden's acquisition followed public debt transactions, negotiated share purchases, and emergency protective conversion based on Meridian disclosures. The espionage question currently concerns Harrow's attempt to obtain protected infrastructure technology through concealed control rights. Conrad's attorney whispered urgently to him. Vivian removed her hand from Ethan's arm. I continued with the conflict evidence. The engagement agreement between Ethan and Vivian appeared on the screen, including clauses linking his marriage, promotion, and personal equity to Meridian's approval of Harrow's exclusivity contract. Several directors reacted with open anger. They had been told the engagement was personal and the partnership independently negotiated. Ethan said it was not binding. Nathaniel displayed his signature. It became binding when you accepted advance compensation routed through a Harrow subsidiary. Financial transfers followed, luxury apartment payments, travel expenses, a private signing bonus, and an option to receive Harrow shares after the technology transfer. Ethan had already sold the project before the board approved it. "I did what was necessary to save Meridian," he said. Lena Patel spoke from across the table. "You were transferring the system, reducing our engineers to contractors, and calling yourself chief executive of what remained." Conrad blamed Ethan. Ethan blamed Conrad. Vivian said her father designed the arrangement. Their alliance collapsed faster than it had formed because it had never contained loyalty, only overlapping appetite. I allowed them to speak until every denial contradicted another. Then I presented the human cost. Harrow's deployment plan prioritized wealthy metropolitan contracts and delayed rural emergency access by 4 years. It allowed the company to charge crisis premiums during declared disasters. Ethan had approved the commercial model after promising me he would protect Lumen's humanitarian purpose. "You told me becoming CEO would give you power to prevent this," I said. "The contract shows you authorized it." He looked at me with something between desperation and resentment. "You had the luxury of ideals because you were secretly rich. I had to survive." "You were earning more in 1 month than most Meridian employees earn in a year." That is not security. No amount would have been security while your worth depended on standing above someone else. He pointed at me. You lied about who you were. You watched me struggle. You let me believe you needed me. I did need you. Not financially, not professionally. I needed the man who defended an intern in an elevator because he believed kindness mattered. I trusted that man. His anger weakened. He was real, perhaps. But he disappeared when cruelty became useful. Vivian stared between us. You were sleeping with her? Ethan said nothing. The engagement ended in his silence. She struck him across the face, removed the diamond ring, and placed it beside the unsigned contract. Conrad ordered her to sit down. She told him the entire arrangement had made her a corporate bargaining chip. For the first time, I saw a person beneath the polished entitlement. It did not erase the way she treated me, but it reminded me that systems of power often train people to injure others while calling their own captivity privilege. I turned to Meridian's directors. Arden Global did not acquire this company to destroy it. Meridian still employs extraordinary engineers and controls infrastructure worth preserving. Existing jobs will remain protected during restructuring. Project Lumen will proceed under an independent public interest charter, with authorship assigned to the full technical team and deployment priority based on emergency need rather than wealth. Relief moved through several phases. Then I addressed the executive changes. Meridian's chairman had concealed debt violations and would step down pending investigation. The chief financial officer was suspended. Directors who approved the Harrow agreement without disclosure would face review. Ethan remained standing at the head of the table as though refusing to sit could preserve authority. Mr. Cole, I said, your employment is terminated immediately for intellectual property theft, undisclosed conflicts of interest, misuse of corporate resources, falsification of authorship, retaliation against a protected employee, and conduct materially damaging to Meridian Axis. He laughed once, almost soundlessly. You cannot fire me because I broke your heart. I am fearing you because the evidence would require any responsible owner to remove you. My broken heart merely means I will not be the person comforting you afterward. I built this division. Then you should have understood it could survive without your name. I have stock options, contractual severance, and executive protections. Nathaniel placed the clawback provisions on the screen. Ethan's options had not vested. His severance became void upon verified fraud and conflict breaches. The apartment belonged to Meridian. The company car, phone, laptop, expense accounts, and club memberships were corporate property. Personal compensation already earned would remain his, subject to legal claims tied to unauthorized payments. The Harrow signing bonus had been frozen by court order. He would not literally lose lawful wages, but every symbol of power he believed proved his worth would disappear before he reached the lobby. You planned this, he said. I prepared for the possibility that the board would choose theft after receiving the truth. You never gave me the truth. Respect should not require my family name. The sentence silenced him more completely than any accusation. Security entered, but I asked them to wait. I gave Ethan one final opportunity to address the board. He looked around the room at directors who no longer avoided his eyes. Engineers who had watched him claim their work, Vivian standing beside the ring she removed, and the lawyers collecting the contract that should have made him chief executive. Then he looked at me. Was any of it real? He asked. The question hurt because I had asked myself the same thing. My love was real, I said. Your kindness may have been real when it cost nothing. Your ambition was real. Your fear was real. Betrayal does not always mean every earlier moment was false. Sometimes it means a person allowed the worst part of himself to overrule the rest. Then forgive me. Forgiveness is not employment. I do not care about the job. He glanced at the screens, the apartment notice, and the security officers. The lie collapsed under its own evidence. You care about everything the job allowed you to appear to be, I said. You confused recognition with identity. Now you will have to discover who you are without a title borrowed from other people's work. Security asked him to surrender his badge, phone, and laptop. He placed them on the table slowly. The engraved fountain pen remained inside his jacket. I noticed the outline. That belongs to you, I said. He touched the pocket. You gave it to me. Yes. Why let me keep it? Because not every gift becomes stolen property when love ends. his face twisted with grief. For one moment, I saw the man in the powerless elevator kneeling to help an assistant gather broken equipment. Then he turned away. Security escorted him through the glass corridor. Employees watched from their desks as the director, who once crossed the building, surrounded by assistants, carried a cardboard box toward the exit. He tried to enter the executive elevator, but his access had already been disabled. He took the public elevator with the security officers. By the time he reached the lobby, Meridian had reclaimed the keys to his vehicle and apartment. A driver offered to take him to a hotel at his own expense. His personal cards remained functional, but the Harrow-linked accounts were frozen. He left the building without severance, stock, corporate housing, staff, or influence. The phrase, "without a penny," later appeared in dramatic retellings. Though the truth was more precise and more important, I did not steal his lawful money. I removed every advantage built on fraud. Justice is not making someone helpless for pleasure. It is refusing to keep financing the illusion that protected them from consequence. The boardroom remained quiet after he left. My voice, once the most shocking fact in the room, quickly became less important than the work ahead. Meridian's debt required restructuring. Harrow threatened litigation. Regulators opened investigations. Employees feared layoffs despite my assurances. The easiest version of revenge would have ended with Ethan leaving and cameras recording my victory. Leadership began after the doors closed. I spent the next 6 months inside Meridian, this time without the Sophie Reed badge. Some employees treated me with exaggerated respect because they feared the new owner. Others resented the deception. A group of interns filed a complaint arguing that my experiment had exposed junior staff to observation without informed consent. They were right to raise the concern. I met with them without attorneys and listened. I explained that I had not secretly recorded private conversations beyond corporate systems or tested individual employees for entertainment. But my hidden identity still altered the meaning of our interactions. Power concealed remains power. My mother's lesson about observing character had never included permission to avoid accountability for the observer. I established an independent review of my conduct. The committee found no legal violation, but criticized the ethical risk of entering the company under incomplete disclosure while holding potential acquisition authority. I accepted the findings publicly. Some advisors warned that admitting error would weaken my position. I believed the opposite. Authority that cannot survive honest criticism is only fear wearing formal clothes. We created rules preventing future owners or board members from conducting similar embedded reviews without independent oversight. I also changed the accommodation system that had allowed managers to treat nonverbal communication as evidence of reduced ability. Employees could now select communication methods without having medical details exposed beyond human resources. Every meeting required accessible channels for written participation. Retaliation against disabled or trauma-affected staff triggered immediate external review. I did not create those policies because I had pretended to be powerless. I created them because thousands of people lived without the hidden authority that allowed me to reveal myself at the perfect moment. Most workers mistreated by executives do not own 60% of the company the following morning. Systems should protect them before a dramatic rescue becomes necessary. Project Lumen continued under Dr. Lena Patel's leadership. I refused the title of sole inventor, even though the foundational architecture belonged to me. The project had grown through the labor of engineers, analysts, dispatch specialists, medical coordinators, and field workers. The new patent listed every qualifying contributor. A public benefit corporation managed deployment, preventing Meridian or Arden from charging crisis premiums during declared emergencies. The first full-scale implementation occurred after a hurricane damaged 3 coastal regions. Lumen rerouted medicine, generators, clean water, and mobile clinics around collapsed roads. Independent analysts estimated that the system shortened critical deliveries by 31 hours. During the first operational briefing, I saw a hospital map display a supply route reaching a mountain community that would otherwise have waited 2 additional days. I thought of rain striking the wrecked car, my mother breathing beside the road, and the emergency network failing to locate us quickly. No technology could rewrite that night, But grief had finally become something other than a room I revisited alone. The success belonged to more than my pain. It belonged to everyone who refused to let Ethan reduce the project to a personal ladder. Harrow Strategic Systems survived but lost the exclusive agreement and faced penalties for concealed control arrangements. Conrad Ross resigned after his own directors discovered he had used company assets to structure Vivian's engagement as a governance tool. Vivian cooperated with investigators and avoided personal charges. She requested a private meeting with me 3 months after the boardroom reveal. I agreed. She arrived without the polished entourage I associated with her. "I treated you horribly," she said before sitting. "Yes." She looked surprised by the direct answer. "I expected you to say it was complicated. The system around you was complicated. The coffee orders and insults were not." She accepted that. She told me her father had planned her relationships since she was 17. Ethan appeared attractive because he seemed self-made. But Conrad offered him power in exchange for marriage before she understood how deeply Ethan was involved with me. "I knew you mattered to him," she said. "I chose to humiliate you because I thought making you small would make me secure." Did it? For several minutes at a time, she asked whether I hated her. "No," I said, "but not hating you does not create trust." She nodded. "We never became friends." Though she later helped establish protections against undisclosed family arrangements in corporate contracts, people wanted a simple villainess competing for Ethan. The truth was less convenient. Vivian caused harm and was also used by a father who measured her value through alliances. Understanding context did not erase responsibility. It simply prevented me from reducing another woman to the role the story found easiest to punish. Ethan's legal case lasted 18 months. Meridian sued for breach of duty and intellectual property theft. Prosecutors reviewed whether his actions met criminal fraud standards. Because he cooperated after the boardroom meeting, returned unauthorized compensation, and provided evidence against Harrow executives, he avoided prison. He received financial penalties, professional restrictions, and a 5-year prohibition from serving as an officer of a public company. His name became a warning inside business schools. Media outlets replayed the moment my voice interrupted the signing. Strangers called him a monster, a fool, and a parasite. Some sent threats I publicly condemned. Academically did not require turning his existence into communal entertainment. He had harmed me, the company, and the project. Courts and regulators had authority to impose consequences. Crowds rarely understand when to stop. 6 months after the case ended, Ethan wrote to me. The letter arrived through counsel, handwritten with the fountain pen I gave him. He did not ask for money or employment. He described working as a technical consultant for a small nonprofit that repaired emergency communication systems in rural towns. His restrictions allowed advisory work but no executive authority. He wrote that losing his title revealed how many relationships had depended on access. Friends disappeared. Former colleagues avoided him. He moved into a rented room above a bakery and used public transportation. "I thought poverty was the thing I escaped," he wrote. "Now I understand I was running from shame, and every promotion only gave the shame a higher floor to occupy." He admitted that he had loved me but loved the version of himself reflected in my admiration more. My silence made him feel powerful because I listened without interrupting. My intelligence made him feel chosen until it threatened to become visible. He claimed Lumen because presenting my work allowed him to become the person he wanted others to see. "When you spoke," he wrote, "the boardroom did not burn because your voice was loud. It burned because every lie depended on your continued silence." I read the sentence several times. He apologized without requesting forgiveness. I did not answer immediately. Months later, I sent one line through counsel. "Build a life in which the apology becomes visible through your choices." That was the last direct message between us for 3 years. My father and I argued after the acquisition. He believed I had remained inside Meridian too long after recognizing Ethan's betrayal. I accused him of preparing the takeover without trusting me. The conflict revealed that he had quietly acquired an additional portion of Meridian's debt months earlier because he feared Harrow would gain control. "You were supposed to be observing," he said. "You became emotionally involved." "I am not a machine." "No. You are the future chair of a company responsible for hundreds of thousands of livelihoods. Then I must understand what emotional involvement does to judgment. He replied, understanding it does not require walking into fire. I touched my mother's ring, which I wore on a chain during difficult meetings. She walked into the boardroom with evidence even after threats. His face changed, and she died. The words ended the argument because they revealed the fear beneath his control. He had already lost her. My experiment made him believe he might lose me to the same combination of principle and danger. We began speaking more honestly after that. He admitted that Arden's wealth had made him increasingly suspicious of everyone near me. I admitted that I used silence partly because speaking risked rejection. You wanted proof people could love Sophia without Arden, he said. Yes. Did you find it? I thought of Ethan helping in the elevator, learning sign language, and later selling my work. I found proof that sincerity can exist and still fail under pressure. That is not comforting. It is more useful than believing people are either genuine or false. Character is repeated choice. My father retired as chief executive 2 years later and became non-executive chairman. Nathaniel continued running Arden Global's operations while I divided my time between Meridian's restructuring and group strategy. Business magazines called me the silent heir, though I no longer remained silent in public. Speaking again required unexpected adjustment. My voice had been private for years, used only with family, therapists, and trusted colleagues. Suddenly, analysts studied its tone. Journalists described it as commanding, cold, warm, rehearsed, or dangerous, depending on the story they wanted. Some critics argued that using nonverbal communication had been manipulative. Others romanticized it as a superpower. Both interpretations missed the truth. Silence had once been an injury. Later, it became protection. Then it became a tool. Eventually, it became a cage I was responsible for opening. No communication method is morally pure. The question is whether it creates understanding or allows power to hide from accountability. I began speaking at conferences about ethical leadership, but I refused invitations asking me to reenact the boardroom reveal for entertainment. That moment had not been a performance. It was the death of a relationship, the exposure of corporate fraud, and the return of a voice connected to my mother's final night. Turning it into a clever trick would have made the same mistake Ethan made with Lumen, converting pain into branding while removing the person who carried it. Instead, I focused on workplace structures. Meridian established anonymous authorship ledgers for early-stage ideas, so junior contributors could not be erased when executives presented projects. Every strategic file recorded the development chain. Promotions required confidential feedback from employees at multiple levels, including assistants and support staff. Executives were evaluated partly on how they treated people who could not influence their careers. Some called the system idealistic. Within 3 years, employee retention rose, internal reporting improved, and innovation output doubled. People share ideas more freely when they do not expect someone stronger to steal them. The building itself changed. The executive floor had once been separated by access points that prevented most employees from reaching decision-makers. We opened shared project spaces and moved board meetings into rooms with transparent schedules and published summaries. I kept the glass boardroom but removed the elevated chair at its head. Leadership did not require furniture explaining hierarchy. The coffee tray from the signing ceremony was placed in Meridian's Ethics Center, beside my old Sophie Reed badge and the first Lumen notebook. The display text did not mention my hidden wealth. It read, "She was the author before the room knew her name." That sentence mattered more than, "Welcome back, Chairwoman." The board had owed Sophie respect even if Sophia Arden never appeared. One evening, nearly 4 years after the takeover, I visited the small nonprofit where Ethan worked. I did not announce my arrival. The organization operated from a converted warehouse and repaired communications equipment for remote emergency teams. Through a window, I watched Ethan teach 3 teenagers how to rebuild a damaged radio relay. He wore an old sweater, carried no executive badge, and listened while a girl corrected his wiring plan. He thanked her and changed the design. When the session ended, he saw me near the doorway. Surprise crossed his face, followed by fear and something quieter. "Why are you here?" he asked. "Lumen is funding regional relay upgrades. Your organization applied. I was not involved in the grant request. I know. He nodded. Did we receive it? The independent committee approved it. Thank you. Do not thank me. The proposal earned support. We stood in silence that no longer belonged to performance. He looked older, with gray appearing near his temples. I kept the pen, he said. I assumed you did. I almost sold it when I needed rent. Why did you not? Because the engraving reminded me that ideas deserve permanence, even when the person holding the pen does not deserve ownership. I asked whether he was happy. He considered the question. Some days, I used to think happiness would begin when no one could look down on me. Now I think it begins when I stop arranging my life around where other people are looking. I understood that lesson. He asked whether I had forgiven him. Enough that I do not need your suffering, I said. Not enough to invite you back into my life. That is fair. Fairness is not the same as comfort. He smiled faintly. You always wrote sentences like that. I still do. He looked at me carefully. Your voice suits you. Years earlier, the comment might have opened a wound. That day, it sounded like an observation from someone who no longer believed the voice existed for him. So did my silence, I said. The problem was never the way I communicated. It was what people decided I was worth before listening. We parted without touching. I did not feel the cinematic closure people expect from stories of betrayal. I felt a quiet release. Ethan had become responsible for his choices. I no longer needed him to remain ruined in order for justice to remain real. The future I once imagined with him had disappeared, but my capacity for love had not. For a long time, I feared trusting anyone again. Every kindness seemed like the beginning of an experiment whose result I already knew. My therapist reminded me that observing people secretly could never create the certainty I wanted. Love required revealing enough truth to allow another person to choose freely. 2 years after visiting Ethan, I met Dr. Maya Chen, a systems physician leading one of Lumen's medical deployment programs. She knew my identity from the beginning. She challenged my decisions publicly, laughed at my terrible cooking, and never treated my silence or voice as mysterious. Our relationship developed without tests. The absence of hidden identity felt more frightening than secrecy because I could not attribute affection to an incomplete picture. Maya saw the wealth, trauma, ambition, mistakes, and caution together, once. When I asked how I could know whether she loved me rather than the world around me, she answered, "You cannot know in advance. You watch what I choose over time, and I do the same with you." My mother might have said something similar. Character was repeated choice. We married privately 3 years later with my father, Nathaniel, Lena Patel, and a small group of friends present. I spoke my vows aloud. Halfway through, emotion tightened my throat and I stopped. Maya waited without rescuing the silence. I finished when I was ready. That moment taught me more about being heard than any boardroom ever did. My voice did not need to remain constant to prove I existed. Silence chosen freely was not disappearance. Today, Project Lumen operates across 32 countries. It routes medical supplies, emergency power, food, and rescue equipment during disasters. Meridian Axis is profitable, independent in operations, and majority owned by Arden's Public Benefit Trust. Employees hold 15% of its equity. No single family can sell the system's core humanitarian rights. The company that nearly collapsed under leaders obsessed with appearing powerful became strongest when authorship, responsibility, and reward moved closer together. The boardroom where I exposed Ethan remains in use. New directors sometimes ask whether the table should be replaced because of its association with scandal. I refuse. Furniture is innocent. The room now hosts an annual meeting where interns present projects directly to the board without executive filtering. The first year, a quiet 22-year-old analyst identified a vulnerability senior directors had missed. When she finished, the room applauded. I wondered how many ideas disappear in companies where the person presenting them lacks the right title, voice, accent, body, education, or family. Wealth gave me the rare ability to return and reclaim what was stolen. Ethical institutions must protect people who cannot. That became the real inheritance of the experience. The media still uses the title The Mute Assistant and the voice that burned the boardroom. It is dramatic, memorable, and wrong in several ways. I was never truly mute in the simple sense they mean. My voice was lost, recovered, hidden, and finally used. It did not burn the boardroom. Truth burned the assumptions holding the room together. Ethan's career did not collapse because I spoke one sentence. It collapsed because his power depended on stolen work, concealed transactions, and the belief that someone without status could be harmed safely. Arden's ownership did not make my accusations valid. The evidence did. My identity changed the speed of accountability, not the moral reality. I tell that distinction whenever young employees ask how to protect themselves. Document your work. Understand contracts. Build alliances beyond one powerful sponsor. Do not mistake private praise for public recognition. Do not surrender authorship in exchange for promises of future protection. And never assume that because someone sees your talent, they also respect your ownership of it. Ethan admired my mind. He still believed he had the right to stand in front of it. The final object my mother left me was a small voice recorder recovered from the wreckage. Most of its files were damaged, but technicians restored one recording several years after the Meridian acquisition. It contained notes she made before exposing the bribery network. Near the end, she spoke directly to me, perhaps intending to send the message after the board meeting. "Sophia," she said, "you will inherit more power than any person should receive without question. Do not prove you deserve it by becoming impossible to hurt. Prove it by remaining honest about where you are vulnerable and refusing to turn vulnerability into permission for others to harm you." I listened to the recording alone in the boardroom after midnight. For years, I thought my mother's final instruction on the roadside meant fear should never make me silent. Now I understand it differently. Fear can choose many shapes. Silence, noise, secrecy, control, ambition, perfection, or the need to test everyone before trusting them. My experiment at Meridian began because I wanted certainty that sincerity existed. What I found was more difficult and more human. People are not fixed as kind or cruel. They make choices under pressure. Ethan once treated a frightened assistant with compassion and later humiliated me to secure power. Vivian mocked my silence and later helped expose the system that used her. Directors ignored junior employees and later supported reforms. I concealed authority to discover truth and had to accept the ethical cost of doing so. Character is not a hidden jewel waiting to be found. It is a structure built through repeated decisions, especially when fear, reward, or humiliation offers an easier alternative. The morning after I heard my mother's restored message, I removed the old Sophie Reed badge from the Ethics Center display and held it in my hand. The plastic was scratched. The photograph showed me with plain hair, a guarded expression, and the careful posture of someone trying not to reveal the space she occupied. I did not feel ashamed of her. She endured what she should not have had to endure, but she also observed, learned, designed, loved, and eventually spoke. She was not less real than Sophia Arden. She was the part of me that knew value did not require announcement. I returned the badge beside the Lumen notebook and added a second line to the display. Power did not create her voice. It only forced the room to admit it had ignored one. That is the truth beneath every dramatic retelling. I did not become formidable when Nathaniel called me chairwoman. I was formidable while carrying coffee. I did not become intelligent when the ownership certificate appeared. I was intelligent while Ethan copied my diagrams. I did not become worthy when 43 people recognized my name. I was worthy while they believed I had none. The voice that mattered was not the first sentence I spoke in the boardroom. It was the internal voice that finally said public humiliation was no longer a price I would pay for private affection. Ethan believed silence meant consent, dependence, and lack of evidence. He never understood that I had spent my life inside silence learning its different meanings. Sometimes silence is terror. Sometimes it is observation. Sometimes it is dignity. Sometimes it is complicity. And sometimes it is the last calm second before a truth powerful people have ignored finally stands up and introduces itself. Goodbye.